So why don't we go ahead and get started? Um, Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining our WebEx panel discussion addressing systemic and institutional racism in our community, Cobb County and North Metro Atlanta. I'm your co-host, Alonzo Q. Ford, along with Nichelle Davis, and this webinar is brought to you by the Omicron Mu Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, also commonly known as the Cobb Alphas, and the Rho Zeta Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm an entrepreneur, founder and managing director of AMG Capital Partners, where we proudly provide equity and access to capital for veterans, minorities, and emerging commercial real estate operators, along with developers on deals from 2 to 200 million. I'm also the owner and CFO of Lowe's Guardian Angel, a multi-million-dollar assisted living business in Metro Atlanta. I bought, sold, and capitalized several hundred million in commercial real estate. I serve as an appointed representative for Atlanta Public Schools and Cobb County School Board committees, as well as having served in the school council at Teasley, Campbell Middle, and Campbell High. I'm a proud graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point, Goizueta Business School, and decorated Army combat veteran, loving husband, devoted father, and proud member of this distinguished chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. So this evening we'll have a discussion that will inspire you to act, to address and redress institutional racism in criminal justice in our community, and most importantly, how to handle tense situations with law enforcement. As always, we're underscoring the importance of voting because voting is right next to economic empowerment and empowerment in general. Vote the entire ballot, and the importance of our local elections, as well as giving you tangible actions that will make a difference. So we'd like to, Nichelle and I would like to introduce our distinguished panelists, and we'll start with Chief Deputy Sonia Allen, who was appointed to Chief Deputy on August 23rd, 2019. She's the second in command of the Cobb County Sheriff's Office. Chief Allen, a Cobb County native and Kennesaw resident, has been employed with the Sheriff's Office since 1992. She grew up in East Cobb and graduated from Sprayberry High School in 1987. She attended the University of West Georgia, where she obtained her Bachelor of Science degree and received her Juris Doctorate from John Marshall Law School. Chief Allen is a member of the State of Georgia Bar and the Cobb County Bar Association, a graduate of Leadership Cobb, an honorary commander, and is an adult leader for Cobb Youth Leadership. She's active in her community as a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated and gymnastics judge for varsity sports throughout Georgia High Schools Association. Throughout her career with the Sheriff's Office, Chief Allen has been assigned to Detention, Marietta, Cobb, Smyrna, Narcotics Unit, Field Operations, Fugitive Court Services, Criminal Investigations Unit, and the Internal Affairs Unit. She's currently assigned to the Executive Office and oversees legal, legislative, budgeting, and contractual services for the agency. A Kennesaw resident, Chief Allen has a daughter that attends the University of North Georgia. And she's so accomplished that, yeah, I got to take a drink of water now. And Nichelle, over to you, if you could, introduce yourself and the rest of our panelists.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nichelle Davis, and I am happy to be here. Without further ado, our next panelist is Dr. Douglas Shipley. He is currently a business coach, consultant, and leadership trainer. He also serves as the president of By Cobb Incorporated, a 501c3 organization that provides mentoring and leadership training to middle and high school students in the Atlanta metropolitan area. Before his work, Dr. Shipley's civil servant career spawned 3 decades in the local and federal law enforcement arenas. In 1984, Dr. Shipley began a law enforcement career as a police officer with the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. During his tenure, With the police department and his patrol duties, Dr. Shipley served as a field training officer slash assessor for new police officers and later full-time instructor at the Kansas City Regional Police Academy. In 1989, Dr. Shipley joined the Federal Bureau of Investigation as a special agent assigned to the Houston Division. In Houston, in addition to his investigative duties, Dr. Shipley was a member of the Violent Crimes Fugitive Task Force and was an assistant team leader for the SWAT team. Dr. Shipley was promoted to supervisory special agent and transferred to Quantico as a full-time instructor. He subsequently held supervisory positions at the FBI headquarters in the Civil Rights Section and the Inspection Division. Dr. Shipley later supervised the Public Corruption / Civil Rights Squad in the FBI's El Paso Division and became a member of the Department of Justice's Alternative Dispute Resolution, ADR, Mediators Group. Following his tenure in El Paso, Dr. Shipley served in the FBI's Bridgeton, Barbados office. The Bridgetown office represents the FBI's interest in international criminal investigations, counterterrorism, liaison, and training in 22 countries and territories throughout the Caribbean. Next, Dr. Shipley transferred to the FBI's International Training and Assistance Unit, where he developed, managed, and implemented all training delivered by the FBI personnel for the continent of Africa. Dr. Shipley's final supervisory duties were in the FBI's Atlanta Division. He oversaw personnel recruitment and hiring, internal investigations, community outreach, and personal training. Dr. Shipley retired from the FBI in 2012 as the acting assistant special agent in charge of the administrative branch for the Atlanta Division. Welcome, Dr. Shipley. You have a lot of history doing this work, so we are excited to hear from you. And next, last but certainly not least, we have Judge Nathan Wade, a Houston, Texas to be exact, who obtained a Bachelor of Arts degree from Texas State University in 1995. He went on to earn a law degree shortly thereafter in 1998. Mr. Wade is a proud member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated and Sigma Pi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, respectively. A former prosecutor and natural-born litigator, Nathan J. Wade is a seasoned attorney licensed to practice in the federal system as well as all of Georgia's courts. He serves the citizens of Marietta, Austell, and Roswell as an associate municipal court judge and as a pro hoc state court judge. Nathan is a partner in the Wade, Bradley, and Campbell law firm, focusing in the areas of contract litigation, family law, personal injury, torts, and criminal defense. So a whole bunch of legal background. As a private practitioner for many years and a past appointed Special Assistant Attorney General for the state of Georgia, Nathan J. Wade has been recognized by his peers with numerous awards for his excellence in legal advocacy, as well as service to his community, to include Georgia's Top Lawyers Legal Elite Award, Georgia's Top 40 Under 40, and the Justice Robert Benham Award for Community Service. Nathan is a husband of Jocelyn Wade for 23 years, and the two are proud parents of Nathan Wade III and Caitlin Wade. So we welcome you, Attorney Nathan Wade. Welcome. So now, Alonzo, back to you.
So Nichelle, would you like to share anything about yourself before we give our commercial break?
I am a proud member of the Rho Zeta Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha here in Cobb County, a current educator and educational equity advocate. I do a lot of community work around voter rights and just community organizing, really, to get out the vote and voter information. So that is me.
So I think that's a great point, that we want to take a brief commercial break to express how important, when you say get out the vote and community advocacy, that's one of the things that, you know, both our organizations are founded on. And so I've asked Brother Cameron Williams to join us, who is leading our voter efforts, voter awareness, voter registration, political action committee. So Cameron, with us getting so close to a very important election, can you share some resources, some information, in 2 minutes or less that you think will be relevant for our audience to know and follow up on and arm them with the best way to move forward in this voting season?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. And the time is winding down. We are 74 days out from Election Day. So some important dates to know. Voting or registration, first off, ends October 5th. So if you have family members, friends, get them there, get them registered. October 12th is when voting actually starts, early voting starts. And of course, November 3rd is Election Day, or I like to call it the last day to vote. So a really good resource is When We All Vote. It's a fantastic website. It's part of a nonprofit organization established by well-known names like Michelle Obama, Tim McGraw, and a host of others. So again, the website is When We All Vote. It's a fantastic website that takes you through the entire registration process. You can check your ballots. You can see who's on the ballot. You can, if you need to update any of your registration, and it'll even put you on a tracking that lets you know if you are 100% ready to vote. So fantastic website. I definitely use that as a resource. Next is the Georgia Secretary of State mobile app. You can download it in your app store right now. GASOS. Download it now. You can get sample ballots as well. You can get sample ballots on When We All Vote as well, and they'll send it to you. You can request absentee ballots. It'll show you how to do absentee ballots. And it's all there for you. So if you were concerned about that, or whether even your polling place, it'll tell you where your polling place is. So all of those kind of things that people are getting some anxiety built up on, whether they might encounter some obstacles, those are some fantastic tools to use. And lastly, for local resources, we have the Cobb Community Alliance Candidate Forum that's currently going on. If you are a Cobb County resident and you are interested in looking at your local representatives who you're going to be voting, it's an opportunity that you can tune in and participate directly with your candidates. Coming up on August 24th, we have the House seat 40 that will be presenting their points of view. So we have Democratic and Republican representation. So again, if you're interested in hearing those issues or making sure your issues are heard, we encourage you to tune in to the Cobb Community Alliance Candidate Forum.
Thank you, Cameron.
For sure.
Appreciate that. That's so important in this season. And with that, I think we'll jump right on into the reason people logged in today. And there are no softball questions, but there are definitely, we've got some heavy hitters here. So I want to start with, on my screen in the top left of the Brady Bunch boxes, Dr. Doug Shipley. And with your experience, being both, law enforcement and then FBI and education and mentorship, can you talk a little bit about just what it is, what it's like being a Black police officer, and the reflection on the current times that we're in and the police officer mindset?
That's a real simple question. I'm gonna answer that in 3 words or less. The Black police officer in today's environment, it's a mixed bag. Black police officers join law enforcement because most of them believe in the mission and trying to help people and serve. At the same time, to be looked at as someone who is them. You're not quite one of us anymore. You're now them. And I'm gonna flip that in a second too, because police officers have a mindset looking at citizens as them and everybody else is us. But Lonzo, what I want to do is take it back even further than that, because the whole topic of what we're talking about today is systemic racism, intrinsic, explicit, implicit bias, and that type of thing. We got to take it back in history, because I'm a historian by nature. 1619, they brought 20 odd souls to this country before it was a country, 100 years before this was a country. And so they had already brought Black people to this country viewing them as less than. So you take that and you put that into the matrix of this country. All men are not created equal. They weren't considered men, and so therefore they weren't equal. You move forward another 400 years and we're still having the same conversation as to whether or not we're equal or not. So when you talk about systemic racism, you have to start before this was a country. You have to start before anybody was born that's on this webinar right now. And when you take that and you look at it, you have to look at it kind of an analogy. America has cancer. It has malignant cancer. That cancer has spread and it's been allowed to spread. So what do you do with malignant cancer? You treat it. You may not be able to cure it, but you can treat it and you can live with it. What we have to do is remember that when you're treating a cancer, you have to stay aggressive about the treatment. You cannot ever let go. You cannot just say, oh, well, I've got cancer and walk away from it. You have to keep treating the cancer. So that's the long answer of your short question about what it's like in today's time frame to work in law enforcement.
Wow, no, that's very powerful. And I want to follow up, if we, equate systemic and institutional racism to a cancer, what do you feel, is the treatment? Like, how can we address it? How can we improve the vitality of our community from a racial standpoint, especially as it relates to criminal justice?
Well, I'm gonna stay on that same cancer analogy. So a real cancer patient, which I am, by the way, you're going to stay aggressive with it. You are going to see the doctor often. You're going to get your signs or your blood work drawn. You're going to do all those kinds of things, and you're going to keep checking on it. If you translate that to what I'm saying about the police, you're going to have oversight. You're going to have individuals within the departments that are actively working to make sure that the department is doing what it's supposed to do. You're going to have leadership that takes a strong and active role in what they do. You have individuals like Chief Deputy Sonia Allen, who is a highly educated, highly decorated woman who is running a department. And she is taking charge and making sure that her officers are doing what they're supposed to do. All too often, people pass the buck. All too often, people don't take their leadership and do what they're supposed to do. And so when you're talking about treating that cancer, you have to take a leadership action. You have to be on top of your game. You have to move forward with that whole treatment analogy and make sure that you are following the prescription that is going to keep you as healthy as possible. If you do not do that, the cancer will take over.
Thank you.
So on the same note then, this question is for Chief Deputy Allen. What are your thoughts on community policing, defunding the police, and lack of diversity in law enforcement, as we need to be aggressive with our solutions during this time? And those are commonly thrown out, right, to our people and talked about. So what are your thoughts on that?
So I'm definitely a proponent for community policing. I believe it's a necessary element between law enforcement and the community. One of the things I feel for the sheriff's office is we don't necessarily have, because of the constitutional duties that we have, we don't typically have the same outreach that a police department would have. Police departments are oftentimes on the street, doing traffic stops and those things. We do have interaction with our community, but it's in different ways. A lot of the processes that the sheriff's office addresses daily are things that are orders from courts, running our detention facility. And we do have areas within the sheriff's office where we really try to reach out, and we do it a lot of times through our youth programs. We have a outreach program where we have schools that we adopt, where our officers get to know, the students at younger ages, and they keep contact with them as they grow through the school systems. I believe that defunding the police is not something that is beneficial at this point. If anything, I would look at more of a reallocation of monies or reappropriating monies to programs that help with the community. We at the Sheriff's Office, we're aware of some of the things that are happening in society today. And, you know, it's a mission for us to try to engage our public. And we're doing things at the Sheriff's Office to try to incorporate that. And, you know, oftentimes, you know, we work for government, and our budgets are not set to where we can do certain things like add a special unit without there being some type of process. So if anything, I would say it's critical now to maybe reallocate or you know, do something different with our funds, but definitely not defund the police. People need us, and we need people to not be afraid of us. There's a balance there that I think needs to be improved, and it's not going to happen if you defund, you know, the work we do.
Thank you, Chief. And I just want to say this to our audience. If you have questions, please start putting them in the Q&A or the chat box so we can you know, rattle them off to the panelists. We want to get your questions answered. We want to, you know, be an interactive dialogue. And so our next question is actually for Judge Nathan Wade. So, you know, again, congratulations on being a judge. That's quite an accomplishment in the field. And, you know, most of us don't have, you know, a judge is something you don't want to go to, you know, especially in our background and history with law enforcement. So, you know, Brother Wade, can you talk about what we need to do or how we can not have to come see a judge?
Yeah, thank you, Alonzo and Michelle. Thank you you guys are doing a wonderful job. I was sort of sitting back, observing, and just kind of falling in love with the format. You guys are awesome, and you sound like a DJ, Alonzo. You sound like you have a radio voice. I don't know if you've had any, but the energy coming from Michelle is, you know, you're feeding off of it, and that's great. But in terms of the question, you know, the thing to remember about coming into contact with police officers, at least in my humble opinion, people should understand that you probably shouldn't engage in a heated debate, or really any type of debate for that matter. That's a no-win situation for a private citizen. You should understand where at that moment the power lies. You're not going to lawyer your way out of the situation. You're not going to cry your way out of the situation. You're not going to lie your way out of the situation. So the best thing to do when you interface with law enforcement is to listen more than you talk. Because if you listen, they may give you the answer. They may tell you exactly what they're looking for. And then you can, because you're listening, you can hear the commands. You can do exactly what they want you to do. Oftentimes, or all too often, human nature is to listen just to respond, not listen to understand. If we listen for understanding, it will tell us how we should respond. It will give us the appropriate action that we need to take, if any. But more importantly, when those police officers if the situation escalates to a level that you're about to be arrested, and they start Mirandizing you and reading your rights and telling you you have a right to remain silent, you should probably listen to that, because whatever you say will be used against you. One of the most difficult obstacles to overcome in litigation as a trial lawyer, one of the most difficult obstacles to overcome is that video camera, that body mic, that lapel camera, that body cam. That thing works both ways. Yeah, it's going to show us what the police officer said and did, but it's also going to show us what the person charged said and did. And sometimes that video doesn't match up with what the person being arrested or charged has described to me, the lawyer, or me, the sitting judge. But those things tell a lot. So my advice, and this is free. No one don't put your credit card up on the screen. Don't start calling me. This is free advice. My advice is to be quiet, accept the citation or the reprimand, and live to fight another day, because there are people in the profession who are paid and trained to take care of legal problems. And the side of the road is not a courtroom. The side of the road is not used for debates. Okay, that's a dangerous place to be already. Those police officers oftentimes are more afraid of you than you are of them sometimes. And the exchange can get heated, and it can escalate really fast.
Alonzo, can I add to that?
Yeah, please.
What Nathan was describing, Judge Wade was describing, was kind of this police officer's mindset. Now, I've trained police officers, I've trained FBI agents in arresting techniques and all of the above. One of the things that individual officers are always trained in is to look for somebody that's resisting force. And force could be their physical presence. Force could be their verbal commands. Force could be them physically doing something. And they're trained to overcome force with force. So if you start escalating, if you start popping off, if you start doing whatever, they're trained to overcome that force with whatever force is necessary to meet and overcome it. So it's not a good idea, as Judge Wade said, to sit on the side of the sidewalk and debate your constitutional rights. You're not going to win that argument. It's just not going to happen. So the better thing to remember is that officers are people too. They come from your communities, and they also have a job to do. Let them do their job. I'm not talking about systemic racism now. I'm just talking about an officer doing their job. Let them do their job. Let them investigate what they're trying to investigate. The time to figure out whether or not that was constitutional or not will be after you get home and are safe.
And that includes the times when you know that you hadn't done anything, and you know that the officer is wrong. You should not engage in a debate screaming, "I know my rights, I know my rights," because that escalates the situation, and ultimately it could add to it's just another criminal charge that that you're facing when you do that. So I would just say comply, comply, and then pull your credit card out and call me.
Okay, and we've got some questions coming in, so I can't wait to Nichelle and I can get to these. But can we peel the onion and go a layer deeper? Right now, there's the nation is charged. It's racially charged. It's charged in so many, politically charged. It's charged in so many different ways, and a lot of it was through the George Floyd murder, the Ahmaud Arbery murder, even right down the street with Rayshard Brooks. So with all those situations, I mean, there's almost, it goes back to Dr. Shipley's point of the us versus them mentality. Where did we go wrong? I mean, in the system, like how could this happen? How did we get here, and what needed to be done differently, or what can we do to address it? And it's just kind of, I know it's broad, but you guys are the experts, and we want to just kind of hear you go in on this issue.
So I'll start, Alonzo, and I'm not an expert at anything by any stretch of the imagination, other than eating. I can eat well. That's it. But this whole us versus them thing, I'm not sure that I agree with that sentiment. Why? Because everyone at the end of the day wants the same thing. We all want to be safe. We all want to be treated fairly. We all want equality. We all want our children to be able to work and go to school and enjoy themselves in a very safe environment. So that's everyone. That's everyone. I don't necessarily agree with this sentiment of us versus them, or am I misunderstanding what you were? Am I mischaracterizing that us versus them portion of your question?
Yeah. So if I can just kind of make an example, when I was in the Middle East in the Army, like we had our tan uniforms, we were friendly, and the people in rags or whatever other they had on, they were the enemy. And so it was a clear line. Whereas here, we're wearing our polos or Gucci or whatever, and then there's the blue. And it just seems like it's not, like Chief Sonia Allen mentioned, that the police is a community force and is in the community, but it just seems like there's a disparity between the Black community and the police force. I mean, it definitely more so than it is any other community and law enforcement. You're on mute. Okay.
When I was in law school, and I kind of attribute this, when I was in law school, I went to school with people who were white and with people who were Black. And the difference in some of the background that some of the students had, which I considered an advantage, was that some of the white students that I went to school with, their grandfathers, their great grandfathers, they come from long lines of lawyers. The Black people that I knew, it was just us. We were the first generation of Black people going to law school. And so I kind of think the us and them mentality, and just as Dr. Shipley was stating earlier, historically kind of could have maybe began when there was maybe no Black law enforcement officers and more white, which is why I think diversity in the police force is very important. The sheriff's office, we have a 60-40 diversity split, and it mimics our community. You can't have people who don't look like you doing things and ensure that people understand you. We all have our own tendencies and our own ways, and we understand people who are like us a little better. But you have to be able to, and that's why I think the diversity training is important. I think being in the community, learning about other people. I think if white officers are in areas that may be more African American populated, there are ways to get to learn about each other. We have things that we do that if I could talk to someone on the side of the street and if he's a Black male and he's moving his hands, that doesn't offend me as much, or not even offend me, but put me on a threat, a perceived threat level as much. But if there is a white officer who may not understand the hand movements, or someone may not feel that they're being understood, and they start using their hands to explain things, that puts the level of threat different. And Dr. Shipley had discussed this earlier about the levels of force and how officers are trained to use the next level of force anytime they're met with force. And I don't know if Dr. Shipley, you had expounded on that previously.
Right. I was just saying that the use of force is something, that's what it's law enforcement. And so the use of force comes up very often. It's not pretty. It's not something that you think about, but we're also talking about individuals that have sworn a duty to protect and defend and all of those kinds of things. Alonzo, you mentioned before about you in the service, and you wear a particular uniform, and you're proud of that uniform, and you will protect your brethren against the people that come in opposition to them. And so remember that mindset, that mentality of, I will protect my brethren, I will make sure that we get home safely. And so when I might have been the first one to mention the us versus them mentality, There's a book that's called Emotional Survival of Law Enforcement and the People Who Love Them. And one of the things that it's talked about in the book, and it's written by a guy who was a law enforcement officer and then became a psychiatrist. And one of the things that it talks about is who you hang with. Okay, just like you hang with the people that you do at work on a daily basis. So law enforcement people hang with law enforcement people. So it reinforces the culture of law enforcement. And so your group, your platoon, your brethren, you reinforce that by being around those people. You work odd hours, you do a strange job that most people can't relate to. So who are you going to talk to? You're going to talk to other law enforcement people. When you call to have somebody move some furniture at your house, you're probably going to call your law enforcement brethren to do that. And so that builds a camaraderie amongst yourselves, but it kind of excludes other people to that camaraderie. And when you talk about people, you talk about them as those people that you have to deal with on a daily basis at work and those kinds of things. Add to that, that's just in general. Add to that when we're talking about someone that might have some implicit biases about some people that they are now working with or around. I used the terminology before about a long time ago about Barney Fife. Barney Fife had power when he got that bullet, right? But if Barney Fife didn't have that bullet, he was basically a coward. And so you add a coward and somebody that may have some implicit bias in their background. And as Judge Wade said, he might be more afraid of you than you are of him. And then you've got other problems that continue it. So the use of force comes along, over utilizing force. All of those things play into it, and it's a psychological thing. It's not necessarily an us versus them, but we set up walls. Everybody wants to do the same thing. That officer wants to have a nice home and live in a safe community, just like you do.
And here's the other thing. In law enforcement, this is a service. This is something that comes from your heart. And if you are in law enforcement for the wrong reasons, you need to get out. The purpose for us in law enforcement is to help people and help in our communities and do things to make things better, to protect and serve. You can't enter into law enforcement for money or to be a bully or to feel powerful because you were bullied in high school. And, you know, even through the hiring process with law enforcement, those are things that we try to, you know, look for. We have, you know, psychological testing that's done. People sit and take a written test for 3 hours, and then they spend 8 hours with a psychiatrist talking to them about that test. We have polygraphs. We ask them questions like, did they lie on their application? Have they lied about anything in their past? We ask them about arrests that may have been, or crimes committed that were undetected. We don't just go off of a criminal history. We will ask you, we will put every crime down on that there is and ask you about that. Even if you didn't go to jail for it, have you ever committed it? And then we reinforce it by asking it again on a polygraph. We try to do all the things that we can do. We speak to family, to friends. But if you, the purpose I say for all that is that we genuinely try to find people who want to be here to help and protect and serve in their communities. I mean, it is a calling. I know people say that about pastors, but being in law enforcement is a calling. No one wants to come to work every day and be yelled at or not be thanked for, you know, just risking your life for somebody. No one wants to do those things for the amount of pay that they get if it's not in their heart.
So the question then to like add on is like, what about when you are being quiet and listening, but the officers are escalating the situation instead of de-escalating it, right? Like particularly when the officer is bringing his own personal ideas or biases to the table at that moment, dealing with our people. And like, what are your thoughts on how to address those types of situations? Because yeah, we said just be quiet, but I think everyone wants to know, like, what do we do in that situation? It's happened time and time again where, you know, people were stopped and for seemingly no reason, right? and the officer seemingly is escalating the situation. And then we hear on the news every other day, like someone else died from our community at the hands of the officer. So what do we do?
My answer doesn't change. As a matter of fact, in those times, I would say you should grow even more silent, be even more quiet when they're trying to escalate it, because especially if you can detect that's a bad apple and they're trying to bait you. And you know, the worst thing to do is to give them a reason to harm you. At the end of the day, and I tell my son this, I have teenage children. I tell them, you know, the goal is to make it home safely. And I think most good officers are thinking the same thing. I've never been in law enforcement. I've never been a police officer, so I don't profess to know what they're thinking. But I've been told that they just want to get home safely, and I know that I want my children to make it home safely. So I tell them ad nauseum, keep your mouth shut, do what he or she says, and come home. Come home, tell me about it, and let me handle it. So I understand we are an emotional people, very passionate people, particularly when we feel as though we're being wronged. But there's a way to handle every situation.
I agree. I just going to say I agree with Judge Wade and what he said. As I've said before, you're dealing with a situation that's only going to continue to escalate. You cannot meet that force with force. You may want to express your viewpoint, and you may want to express all of these other things, but until and unless we can get those bad apples out of law enforcement, you are not going to win that situation. Let's get that individual out of law enforcement. As Chief Deputy Allen said, there are people that should not be in this profession. They are bullies and they are cowards, and they should not be here. They are bigots. They are implicitly biased. They are explicitly biased. And we need to get them off the police department because it's tainting and giving everybody a bad name. All law enforcement is not bad. Can you think of the thousands or millions of people in law enforcement? They are not all bad. If there were, we would have nothing else on the news. Right now, we have a lot of things on the news because it is coming to light. 2020 is a year of clear vision. We are seeing things like we have never seen before in our lifetimes. And so all we're doing is seeing what has already been there. We just need to get them out of the organizations.
Okay, so to that note then, right? So one of the attendees asked, how do you convince friends and family members that you're one of the good cops, given current and ongoing negative perception of law enforcement and by the general public? But on the other hand, how does Cobb deal, or any police department, deal with those repeat offenders? Because we also hear, like, a lot of these times, there are bad apples, like you said, to your point, and they're repeat offenders, but yet still being able to serve in that capacity. Two-part question.
And like we said, Chief, Allen, like to you.
So, I would say that's a great question, and I'm glad that it was asked in that fashion, because I can bring up a point. Right now, my firm is working on an assessment and review of issues just like this, solely within the sheriff's department. So Sheriff Warren and Chief Allen has commissioned us to do that, just to root out any of these issues. If we can find them, if we can bring them to their attention, if they exist, then they'll correct them. I think that's a great start. That's very few people are going to allow you into their environment and tell you to critique their environment. I do not work for the sheriff's department. I am an independent. My firm is independent of that. And to invite an independent firm into your environment and say, inspect all you like, tell me what you find. I respect that, and I think that's awesome. But if we can find a bad apple with this type of treatment, the way that we will probably do it would be through some level of complaint. It rarely do things happen with a bad apple and someone at some point hadn't pointed it out to the internal affairs division of the agency. So if we can find that, that's a good start. Would you say, Chief?
Yes, we have levels. We have investigations and we have inspections. So we have a section of our internal affairs unit that not only gets called out for a complaint that would come out and do an investigation. It is an inspectional unit to where our policies are followed, and they will take the policies for an area and they will go and do impromptu inspections to ensure that there's compliance with our policies. We assess incidents that occur and we compare it to our policy and internal affairs, which, just like on TV, nobody likes internal affairs, but somebody has to be internal affairs. They're the cops of the cops. And it's a very, very necessary piece to every agency. I can't tell you, I was an internal affairs investigator. I've been the supervisor over internal affairs, and no one likes those people because they are the people that hold those people accountable, outside of supervisors and other officers who may note something. But when there's a complaint, it gets investigated, it goes through a process, and it doesn't have to just start with another employee. It can start, we've had complaints where someone has called in, a husband has called in on a wife, or a coworker tells on another coworker, because part of our policy is that, and going back to the George Floyd, you can't sit by and watch someone do it. To me, that makes you complicit with their actions. So if you don't want to be guilty of it, then you need to come forward.
It goes back to the cultural aspect of the whole thing. If you allow a culture like that to exist, it is cancerous. It will take over. And so we go back to leadership again. Your leader has to set the tone. Your leader has to set what the culture will be of the organization. If your organization has a culture in which officers kneel on people's necks until they die. Okay.
Well, and there's so many good questions coming in through the chat, through Facebook. We're going to try and hit as many as we can, and we might combine some together. So speaking of culture and rules of engagement, one question was, what is Cobb's policy on body cams, and is that something that they can turn on, turn off? And then in addition to that, is there some type of rules of engagement with regards to, knowing what the police, how they escalate, and then knowing if there's any rules of engagement that the citizens should know?
So I'll speak on the body cam. Within Cobb, we have a sheriff's office and a police department. In Cobb County, in the state of Georgia, there are 159 counties, and we have, not every county has a county police department, but in Cobb County we do. And within our county, we also have municipalities. So everybody's policy is different on camcorders or body cams, because every agency sets their own policy. For the sheriff's office, when we, engage a person, when we get out of the car, they are to turn their cameras on. We have policies that state that they have to do that. If at the end of the night, when they come back and they download their camera feed, there's a supervisor that reviews the downloaded videos. And that's another layer of, I've seen cases come through IA where no one complained about anything, but a supervisor reviewing the video saw that the officer might have done something that, wasn't per policy. So we do discipline people for not turning on their body camera. And the only time that I'm aware of where it has been, and it's not even acceptable, but it was explainable, it was because of a malfunction. The body camera itself wasn't working, and a request had been, made through IT prior to, the event. But that's, it's there to protect them, and I preach it to the young kids coming in all the time. Keep your camera on. It is there the same way. It's going to record your actions, and if you follow policy, your actions are of no issue, and it will protect you. If someone says you did something that you didn't do, if you have your camera on, it shows that you did not do what they said you did. If you have it off, when I was coming up 100 years ago, my supervisor used to tell me if it wasn't wrote down, it didn't happen. That was the phrase. And so documentation was key. You always had to write in detail the who, the what, the why, the when, the where. But now the younger generation has the body cameras. So I think it's helpful both ways.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that. So now I'm going to combine like two questions together, but they go together. So what measures are being taken on an ongoing basis around training of our law enforcement around implicit bias? Is that even a focal point of the training for officers? And are they prepared for all diverse scenarios in different communities? So just purely on the training, implicit bias and diverse training experiences in different communities.
I know that many law enforcement agencies are doing implicit bias training now. Now, research would show that implicit bias training gives you a perspective and lets you know some of the things that you might be biased about, but that's not necessarily making a difference. And so one of the things that is recently they're talking about is not just the implicit bias training, but actually doing things with their behavior. And again, that goes with supervising and that goes with leadership. So implicit bias training is being done, yes, but there needs to be more done than just implicit bias training. So now that I know that I have these biases towards people that are taller than me, okay, what else? And so that's all I'm saying. You need to work on the behaviors, and that's where leadership, that's where supervision, that's where staying aggressive with the cancer and the treatment comes in.
Is there currently emphasis being placed on that though? So like identifying the implicit bias, as you said, is something that is being done, but what about the addressing it piece? Do you know like what is being done around that?
Chief Allen would have to address what they might do in Cobb. I haven't been quote unquote in law enforcement in the last 5 years or so, longer than that now. But the point is that addressing what's happening has always been the same thing, and it all starts with paying attention. It all starts with making sure that you address things as they come up, behaviors. If you don't allow it, if you don't allow it to perpetuate in your organization, it's not going to stay there, and it's certainly not going to stay in your organization. It might move to somebody else's organization, but it's not going to stay in yours.
And I think the point of most of the training and identifying the biases is to teach you how to overcome those. I've not been to any training that just pointed out that I had a bias and then didn't teach me, how to overcome those biases and to learn about other people and personality types and all those things. Most of the courses that I've taken or that are mandated for us to take in our training that we take every year, they follow up on, how it's perceived, how to address it, how to deal with it.
Law enforcement is a very difficult profession, as Chief Allen pointed out. You're not just dealing with the enforcement of the traffic laws. You're just not dealing with whatever. You're a psychologist, you're a psychiatrist, you're a counselor. you're a helper, you're all these other things, and you're calling on this individual to do all of that all at the same time while thinking about officer safety, whether or not they're going to make it home, whether or not you're doing something that is in compliance, whether or not you're the legal definition of whatever it is that they stopped you for is appropriate, etc. So they're running through a litany of things in their mind all at the same time. And in their RAM, running in their background, might be those implicit bias kind of things. And so that's about something completely different. Now they're making decisions based on maybe these thought patterns of people being taller than me and whatever. And so we've got confirmation bias that might be happening. So I think that all tall people walk a certain way. Look at that tall person walking that way. Sure enough. So all of those things go on through that officer's mind in those split seconds that they're dealing with you every time they make a traffic stop. I know Chief Allen's group generally doesn't make traffic things, but every time an officer makes a traffic stop, all of those things are going through their mind all at the same time.
And that kind of speaks to almost rules of engagement, because they're going through a checklist in their mind. But real quick, before we kind of go into that, wanted to talk about internal affairs, implicit bias, and then, you know, the citizens. If there's like somebody out there that has that implicit bias, is there a forum for citizens to, you know, be kind of like a internal affairs, or, you know, relate any problematic situation that's systemic in the community to the, you know, police department or sheriff's department, or wherever they're having the issue, like a citizens review board, or any type of accountability matrix? Does that?
I know that there are citizen review boards, I believe, and we don't have one for the sheriff's office. I believe there may be one with the police department. I'm not sure, but we answer to the citizens. That's the difference between the sheriff's office and the police departments. The police departments answer to the board of commissioners, or the city managers. We answer to the people. Every 4 years, our sheriff gets an evaluation, a job performance evaluation, and that's the election. So that's who we answer to, and we take calls. We have websites. We invite people in. We are inspected by the grand jury 6 times a year. The grand jury comes and does an inspection of our facility, and we talk and have discussions with the grand jury. And they write a review. We're certified in different areas where we have to keep certain audits done on our processes, and you know, we're constantly inspected here at the sheriff's office, and we have things that, you know, we'll take to other agencies to look at if there's some type of conflict. You know, there's lots of oversight for us, you know.
I think, Alonzo, I think this is the spirit of your question, dealing more with where a citizen can go in order to lodge a complaint, or is it are citizen complaints taken seriously?
Both. You nailed both. Yeah.
So I'm going to say this, in the legal world, and I'll put my attorney hat on, if ever I am dealing with a situation where the officer from whatever jurisdiction on the other side has something in their file or some blemish on their record that in any way would discredit them, I would use it. I would use it, and it's highly effective. Most agencies, I would think, would know that they're making a very bad decision by maintaining employment of an individual who has received racial complaints or complaints of excessive force. Those types of complaints, if someone were to discover them, will open you up to litigation and expose your organization to some damaging liability. So I'm going to encourage whomever it is to, if there's a legitimate complaint, then don't disappear. Don't take that and shy away and hide yourself in a corner. I would say walk into whatever police or law enforcement agency it is and ask to speak with a supervisor and let them point you in the right direction to figure out how to voice your concern or lodge a formal complaint.
Let me give you one more, Alonzo. The FBI, amongst many of its federal statutes and things, has one in which they investigate, and that's in the civil rights aspect, and it's called color of law. And color of law is abuse of authority. And that comes anybody who is an elected official, anyone who is a sworn law enforcement official. Color of law is the federal statute that you're looking at. And that is someone who has used excessive force. That is someone who has stolen property using their office to do it. That could be a judge, that could be a police officer, that could be a sheriff's officer. It could be anyone that is abusing their authority under the color of their uniform, under color of law.
Wow, that's powerful, because we had a battery of questions about that. Specifically, how are these, I guess, infractions being tracked and handled is one of them. And then I'll go ahead and ask two. So one, how's it being handled? And then two, is Georgia a state where citizens must produce ID to police upon request without probable cause? So I know there's kind of, so maybe you can address the first one first. How is it being tracked and handled? And then, I mean, these are not my questions. These are the questions of our community, and they're taking off the gloves. So, I mean,
Yep.
this is a good
We're trying to get
discussion.
them all in.
Right.
I don't know how each local jurisdiction handles their complaints, because like Chief Allen said, that there might be a complaint office in their department, and there may not be one in somebody else's department. The FBI keeps statistics on stuff all the time. Now, the civil rights statistics, color of law statistics, yeah, those will be out annually, but that doesn't do much for you other than know that it happens. If an agency goes to the point that it seems like the entire agency has a problem, then the Department of Justice comes in and they look at the agency and they file suits against the agency, and they have to comply with certain things relative to that. There have been police departments across the country that have been under those kinds of orders. Los Angeles is a police department that you might think of that's been under one of those kinds of orders, et cetera. But that's how it's tracked federally. Locally, not sure.
Okay, so as you had your legal hat on, Attorney Wade, in the case of Ahmaud Arbery, right? How were the offenders able to still be free for so long until there was a public outcry for justice? Because I'm sure that even in that case, citizens were going and reporting like this happened, but not really, like, especially his mom, right? Not being addressed appropriately. So until public outcry happened, how did that happen? Where it was just so much time that passed.
Okay, I'm going to respond to that, but I just want to backtrack just a little bit, because I think Chief Deputy Allen missed her opportunity to explain how their complaints are being handled and tracked. So can we do that, and then I'll.
Sounds good.
And what would you like for me to, how our complaints are tracked and handled?
Right.
Well, once a complaint's made, they receive a case number. So that's the tracking part, and we investigate them. We'll have a finding. The officers are our sworn personnel are civil service protected, and so in order to discipline or do any type of disciplinary process that could end up with days off or anything like that, taking time away from an officer without pay, we have to have a disciplinary hearing. Internal Affairs will present the findings, and the command staff will make a decision based on the findings. We give the officer the opportunity to speak, and we also are allowed to ask direct questions of the officer. And from there will be, usually it's me or Sheriff Warren, we will institute whatever discipline is necessary. The officers being disciplined has the right to appeal in a civil service hearing, and that is through the county, the Cobb County HR. They'll go through that process with them. We track disciplinary acts, progressive discipline. If a person does one thing, then they do another thing. We just as Judge Wade was saying earlier, at some point, if we don't do something with the officer, we are becoming negligent, and we will be liable for the officer's actions. So yes, it's very important for us to always track disciplinary process and the acts of our officers.
I just didn't want to cheat that person who asked the question and not respond to it fully.
Sorry.
So as to that Arbery situation, I think that this is where we get into the importance of elections. This is where you, the citizens, get to decide what happens to people like the ones who did what they did to Mr. Arbery, because the district attorney, the elected district attorney, has the authority to make that decision. They will decide when and if someone is going to be charged with the crime. It just so happened that it took the stepping in of a different jurisdiction, in this case, Cobb County, for those charges to be initiated. Their local district attorney, for whatever reason, I don't know what the evidence was or what they saw, but for whatever reason, they decided not to charge. So that's their discretion, which brings me to the next point. It is exceedingly important that we as voters know and understand the issues. Not that we're emotional about an issue and we want to do what's popular. We want to do what's right. As the voters, we need to do what's right. So we have to understand the depth of the issue, not the emotional, sensational, feel good, sexy stuff, but drill down into the true issues of a candidate, and make your decision based upon your understanding of that particular person's views on the issues, whether they line up with yours. But ultimately, it is easy. All too often, it's very easy to hear a bit and a piece of something, take that and run with it, and go to the voting booth, and you've done the wrong thing before you know it. So I would just encourage people, voters, even myself, take the time. I challenge you to learn about these candidates, not just what they're telling you, but let's look at what they're not telling you, and cast your, and then vote your conscience.
Okay.
Thank you.
So,
Nichelle, if I could jump in with another one from several questions. This is very tactical, and there's been several questions about how you can respond. And Brother Wade, you did mention that the best thing is to comply, but I would keep getting the questions. What if a cop wants to come in your house and he has no warrant. Or if you're driving and he wants you to get out of the car, like, I mean, what really are your rights, and what could you do and what should you do may be different. So how would somebody respond to those situations?
So a car in a home, obviously a car is an extension of your home, but those are two totally different scenarios. If you're in a vehicle and a police officer, for any reason, no reason, a legitimate reason, whatever the reason, asks you to step out of the vehicle, my advice is that you do that. Because we've seen what happens when you don't. And there's more than one example of that, even here locally. Just step out of the vehicle. And that officer can be dealt with in the courtroom. That's the appropriate setting. I know that you don't want to hear that as a response, but that's the answer. Comply. Now, if you're home and an officer asks to come into your home and he doesn't have a warrant, that's your home. You can say no. That's the plain answer. That's the simple answer. You can say no. Does that mean that they're not going to gain entry at some point? No, because they have avenues that they can go through in order to gain entry into your home, whether you like it or not. But if they ask you the question, then you have a right to answer it. And if you don't want them in your home and they don't have a warrant, then you can say no.
Now, you also remember a couple of years ago, Henry Louis Gates, famed historian, was trying to get into his home. He was having trouble with the lock. They called the Cambridge, Massachusetts Police Department, and ultimately ended up arresting him in his house. Now, it was all wrong, but it happened. But he's alive to tell about it. And so, again, I'm not advocating it almost, when I hear the questions coming up, it's like, okay, but here's what you can really do. And what you should do is you should fight back, and you fight back at this point. No, my suggestion is that you live to tell the story. My suggestion is that you complain about it to the internal affairs or whatever organizational grouping that is there in that organization. My advice to you is not to try to meet force with force. You cannot win. Let's say that you decide that I'm not going to take this anymore and I'm going to fight this police officer. How do you think that's going to end? Let's be real. Because that police officer is going to call his brethren. Those brethren are going to take you into custody. It didn't end well for you. Yes. You showed them, you told them that you were not a punk and you weren't going to go like that, but you're in jail now. Now you're facing multiple charges of a lot of different things. That's not the way to go. How about live to tell the story, complain to the individuals that need to be complained to, and handle your business in a more appropriate manner as opposed to trying to escalate it.
Gotcha. Live to tell the story. All right, I'm here for it. And now the question, $1 million question, right? As a community, where do we go from here? So how do we break down the fear that exists in our community when dealing with law enforcement, period?
I think it's through education and through forums, much like what we're doing today. We can all see Dr. Shipley, Chief Allen. Those are people of color who are engaged in law enforcement, and they're real people. They're not machines. They feel, they bleed, they cry. I think days of old, there was a huge separation, there was a huge gap between the public and members of law enforcement, particularly within the African American community. I think that we need to somehow recruit more police officers of color. We need to somehow have some type of co-ops between the schools with the police department. I think that it was alluded to earlier that the sheriff's department participates in. But those are the things that make them human. And those are the things that they're not the boogeyman. They're not going to get you. And that's what we think, you know. But that's my 2 cents.
To me, it even starts, you know, with, I used to hate when I was in uniform and I would be in a store and there would be a small child crying or doing something, and their mother would always point to me and say, she's going to take you away and take you to jail if you don't stop crying. You know, that makes us the boogeyman. Those things, people don't realize it, but people grow up thinking that I'm here to take you away and take you to jail when I'm not. I don't want you to fear me, and I don't want to fear you. I want to somehow for us to all be able to understand each other. And, you know, I think we used to have the verbal judo classes. I'm not sure because I'm old now, but, you know, I don't know how they're doing those now, but I feel like the verbal judo classes used to kind of teach us ways to talk to people. When I started off in the jail, you don't have a weapon when you're in the jail working, and you don't have the things that people see on regular officers' belts, you know, to protect yourself. So the art of getting along and being respected came from your mouth. And you didn't walk in talking to people disrespectfully. You know, you talked to them the way you wanted to be talked to. And you realize that people in jail or people you may encounter, you know, on a call, that could be your mom, that could be your sister, your brother. You know, everybody knows somebody who's had contact with law enforcement. And, you know, I always try to live by that and think to myself, you know, this man I'm talking to is somebody's father. You know, it's having a respect for each other, which I think has deteriorated. And I think, you know, that's an area that we on both sides need to work on.
I agree with both what they both said, and it started with Judge Wade when he said that sometimes they don't see each other as being human, and if we see each other as being human, we're a lot further along. Some of these atrocious things don't happen when you're dealing with another human being.
Wow, this has been incredibly insightful. We just have time for one more question, and this question is you know, a bit more existential, and you know, want to get your thoughts on it. So right now, 2020 is a year that our grandkids will be reading about in history books, and we actually have a lot of support right now from you know, the world, from, you know, whites, from people in general supporting you know, Black Lives Matter. And in fact, as I'm jogging or biking through the neighborhood, I see more signs that said I'm listening, Black Lives Matter, than I've ever seen, and it's encouraging. And on top of that, we've got an Alpha Kappa Alpha soror attorney general running for vice president of the United States. And so this is a moment. This is a moment in history. And so if you could paint the picture and influence the world in a way, influence our nation, our community, and wave a magic wand and make a change and make a legacy, what would your dream be? What would you like to see happen in criminal justice and law enforcement? And we'll wrap it up with that question.
2 words for me is fairness and consistency. You know, be consistent in the way you treat people and do it fairly and do the right thing.
My word was equity. Not everybody is treated equally, but you can treat them with equity, if you understand what I mean.
And I'd use respect. You know, while I concur with the other 2 panelists, respect is a very important piece of that puzzle, because without it, you have what we're experiencing now, just total chaos. The things that we've seen at the Wendy's, or the things that we've seen with the Arbery case, that's from a total lack of respect. We don't respect one another. If we would pause and take the time to listen and respect each other, we'd probably realize that we have more in common than we do things that separate us. So respect would be mine.
Thank you. Nichelle, any final comments?
Yes, we thank you all so much for spending time with us this evening and really enlightening us on the harsh realities, because some things we probably don't necessarily want to hear, but hey, we want to get home alive. So we thank you all so much for sharing your expertise in this matter. And we thank you, and we look forward to building more relationships with you all around this matter in the future. So thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And I just like to say that, we're delighted to have the conversation that moves us forward. We expect that our audience is more informed and can take action. We have armed with resources and ideas and things. And we also want to thank you, our inspiring panelists, Judge Wade, Chief Allen, Dr. Shipley, and everybody who made this happen. Nichelle, Willie Robinson, and James Pippins of Cobb Alphas, Brother President Art Fleming, for your support. And most importantly, we want to thank our wonderful participants for being a part of the conversation, the community. We are looking to have our next webinar, not next month in September, but in October, the third Thursday of October. And we're going to do a special shout on voting the vote and empowerment. And so again, we want to thank you for all you do for service, for your curiosity, for racial equity, and for our community. So thank you very much, and have a great night.
Good night. And remember, request your absentee ballot. All right, get registered by October 5th. Have a great night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.